Great. We're live. No music. Just straight into the show. Alexander.
Indeed.
How are you doing?
I'm very well. It's a beautiful sunny day here in London. We had, by the way, it's awful what we're hearing about the storms in Germany. We had storms in Moscow, by the way, a short while before. We also had storms in London, including where I lived. They're nothing like as bad, by the way. So if anybody from Germany is here and in those particular regions of Germany which were affected, regions I know well, Netherlands too, can I just say, our great condolences to all of you. And I hope, you will all come through. But those of you who've lost friends and loved ones, well, our condolences, definitely.
All right. Thank you for everyone who is joining us on this live stream. I believe we have Spartan Warrior Queen is in the house. How are you doing? Good to see you with us moderating. We also have moderating GEC from Australia, right? GEC is moderating. How are you doing? GEC 812, good to have you here. And of course, Valley S, who opened it up with a $20 super chat. Valley S is also moderating. Great to see you here as well. And I also think I saw Zariel here as well. I'm not sure. I think I did. Zariel, if you are in the house, good to have you here as well. Thank you to everyone joining us for another live stream where we will just take your questions. We will take your questions from the chat, from super chats. If you guys can, maybe, I don't know, knock on my door and maybe slip a note underneath with a question, we'll take that as well, Alexander. People want to do the same for Alexander. That's also cool.
Absolutely.
Whichever way you can get us your questions, get them to us and we'll try to answer them. And we'll just have a chat about what's going on in the world. Alexander, before we were going to go live, we got a little sidetracked because you were talking about how the world is on fire. One thing is definitely on fire, and that is inflation. Alexander, you were saying, and then I cut you off and I said, hold that thought. Alexander, talk about inflation. Let's go live and talk about inflation.
Because that is the underlying blaze. That's what's creating a lot of this instability now. Because of course, what you're seeing is the United States and the European Union, or rather the central banks, and to what extent they exist, the governments in Europe and in America, printing money now like there's no tomorrow, and distributing money directly to their populations, which has never happened before, at least not on this scale. And what you see is inflation is now growing, and it's 5.4% inflation in the United States. That's the official figure. I know there are many people who think it's higher than that. And of course, we've seen inflation rising in Europe, and we also see telltale signs that inflation is starting to take off in a big way, in that goods, products are now starting to disappear in some ways. You're starting to see gaps in the shops. For example, in my food shops nearby where I live, suddenly they were all out of grapes in the summer. I mean, that was something I noticed because I happen to be someone who eats lots of grapes. But I mean, and that's just one example. I've noticed lots of other things. They disappear off the shelves for a while. Eventually they get back. But when you look carefully at the prices, you see that when they reappear, prices have gone up. So more and more of this is happening, and it's happening all around the world, and inflation is rising, and inflation rising in the United States is a problem. Inflation rising in Europe is a problem, but inflation in other parts of the world, when it rises, it's not a problem, it's a crisis, because people who are short of food, people who are short of energy, who are finding it very difficult to make ends meet, they are pushed to the margins, and they respond by protesting. And when we talk about a world being on fire, we have to understand that many of the protests that we're now seeing in many places around the world, in South America, in Cuba, in other places too, that they are partly driven by this rise in prices, this worldwide increase in inflation. And all of this is happening against the background of an international system which is already very, very fragile. We see the situation in Afghanistan taking a particular direction. We see the Middle East, very uncertain situations in the Middle East. One gets the sense that some parts of the US government want to withdraw from Iraq and Syria. Others are resisting. We're seeing contradictory statements coming out about that. Very interesting things happened over the last few days on that topic, which no doubt we'll discuss. So a very fragile situation altogether, but the underlying problems are with the problems in the economy. They nearly always are, by the way. And inflation, as I said, is now taking off in a big way.
Yeah. We have Turkey targeted for regime change. We have Victoria Nuland talking about regime change in Belarus. We had the events in South Africa. We had the assassination of the Haitian president. We have passports being rolled out all over the place, making the passport mandatory for non-essential services. Boy, things are really being sped up. And we have Alexander. Lots of news coming out of Arizona and Georgia, which seem to vindicate so much reporting that not only we have done, but many people have done with regards to the events of November in the United States.
And had to face consequences for. And by the way, many of the problems that we discussed in the United States are now apparently beginning to spread to all sorts of places. So we had a by-election here in London, in Britain, sorry, not in London, at a place called Batley and Spen. And it was surprising. It was very interesting to hear again that at the just as the results appeared to be pointing in one direction, a truck turned up with a mass of postal ballots, and the results suddenly changed. And
they're not hiding it anymore.
It changed in favor of the candidate of the Labour Party, and perhaps it's just a coincidence that the party that is in charge of the local council in that particular place, which was the place which collated all those ballots, those postal ballots that appeared in the truck, is also from the Labour Party. Just saying, I mean, I'm not jumping to any conclusions. There is a court case about it. But, postal ballots are now becoming universal. And we see that court cases in America, I always said this is going to take a very long time to work out. I always said, if you remember when we were talking about these things, that there is a difference between political time and legal time. And we see that legal time is now starting to move forward, and things are beginning to come to light and to be talked about, which were not being talked about before. So that's not something to overlook. But can I also make a general observation, which is, if you go back to some of the things we were talking about last year, during the election, before the election itself, we were already saying that if there was a change, all sorts of things would start to happen. And some of those things, sure enough, are indeed happening. We see more wars, more regime change operations, and we see fundamental changes being carried out in the economy. Money printing, money emission on an extraordinary scale, and in a way that would not have happened had the election gone a different way. I'm still being very careful, by the way, because obviously we need to be very careful what we say on these programs. And I would ask and remind people that, if you want us to continue answering your questions, you've got to show some of the same care that we do when you put those questions.
Yeah, that's why they're in such a rush, because it's like you said, things take some time to work out. And so as everything gets uncovered over the months and years, the elite and the globalists and the people in power, they have to make sure that they roll out the control mechanisms and the surveillance system and the propaganda and all of that stuff to make sure that they can cover their tracks and get us under control, because a lot of things are going to come about in the next, 3 months to say 2 years that are going to upset a lot of people, or are going to vindicate a lot of what many people have been saying. And so they really need to get that surveillance infrastructure in place.
Well, indeed. Well, can I just say, control becomes increasingly important when discontent rises, and surveillance obviously becomes increasingly important when discontent rises. And, I talked about Cuba, South America, but of course, as you rightly said, we have problems in all sorts of other places, in Haiti, in South Africa, in France, in Europe. Many places in Europe now, people are protesting. There's going to be protests in Britain very soon, and London apparently. So, all of this is partly about resisting the control mechanisms. It's also, of course, driven in many cases by the economic hardships that are caused by inflation. And by the way, I've noticed that some of the people who are the economic high priests of the new monetary system ideas, well, they first started saying, well, inflation is going to be transitory. It's not going to become embedded. It's not going to be a problem for very long. And in fact, we've seen it rising, and it's beginning to become clear that it is going to be around for a long time. It's going to get worse. And now we're starting to see a shift. And I noticed the first article in The Guardian, which is, of course, the liberal Bible newspaper, if you like, the place where you always see these things, where they say, well, inflation is going to rise, but it's not a problem.
Yeah,
inflation is not, it's fine. We can continue, provided, we're able to just go on printing and circulating money and all of these things. Inflation isn't really a problem. It only hurts rich people, supposedly, which is the actually the opposite of the truth, can I just say? I mean, it's inflation. The people it hurts most are those who own less, who have to go out to the shops, and they're already living on limited budgets, and they find that things are rising all around them, and who find that they can't buy things in the shops, they can't pay for their utilities, they struggle to pay their debts already, because of course many of them are heavily in debt, and their chances of ever buying a house become ever more difficult. And that's just what happens in the advanced countries, what happens in places like Egypt, for example, or South Africa, where people are living on the margins. Well, there it becomes even more desperate.
Yeah, that is why California, I believe the California House passed universal basic income, something along those lines, or passed the frameworks of it. Yeah. They're moving fast. They're moving fast. They're
moving very, very fast. But it's an ideological project. And I really want to say this again. I mean, it's all based upon certain beliefs which have become very entrenched. And, when people start to adjust their thinking, when they start saying, inflation will be transitory, and then inflation doesn't matter, what that tells you is that they're not going to change the underlying policy. They're ideologically committed to the underlying policy. So the worse things become, the more determined and obsessed they are to continue with what they're doing. That's very much what ideologically driven people, how they respond to problems. They don't question their belief system. They become even more doctrinaire and dogmatic about it, and even more determined to impose controls. So we're going to see this intensify and accelerate over the next 2 years, but it will not succeed. On the contrary, it will eventually provoke more opposition than they can cope with. And the idea that these people actually welcome chaos, they probably welcome it up to a point, but always the problem with sowing chaos is that it in the end overwhelms you. And that's a fact which people never seem to understand, but which repeats itself constantly throughout history.
Yeah, the part that worries me about the chaos is that it's baked in. They want the chaos. What worries me is that they want the chaos in order, once again, to provide the solution, which is more authoritarianism, more control, etc. That's what worries me is they don't mind the chaos. They actually want the chaos. And then they're going to come and they're going to provide the solution to the chaos. Well, that's the worrying part.
That's what they always think they can do. But as I said, the problem is, that chaos is chaos. It's not easy to control. I mean, as is well known, I studied Russian history very intensely when I was at a university. And I remember that this is very much the policy of certain people in Russia at the beginning of the 20th century. They actually actively aided the forces of chaos there. They wanted all kinds of, the Bolsheviks, the revolution, the economic situation, the strikes. They wanted all of that to happen because they thought that that would open their way to gaining control and pushing aside the existing structures and imposing their own. And what those particular people found was that when the events happened, they couldn't control the chaos at all. And it was an entirely different group of people, the Bolsheviks, in fact, who actually stepped in and imposed a completely different solution. Chaos is a very difficult thing to control. And people who sow it, people who sow the dragon's teeth, have need to be very careful what they wish for. And if they're not careful, what they could end up with is not a chaos they control, but a systems collapse, which will be as bad for them as it is for everyone else. But that's unfortunately something that ideologues never see.
Yeah, but 70 years, Alexander. The
Bolsheviks,
absolutely. Communism.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a 70 years tragedy.
Absolutely. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is that if you look at some of the people who were involved in early 20th century Russia, I mean, they went down.
You mean like a Trotsky, for example.
Exactly. I mean, they went down with the ship. I mean, that was the point. And I mean, I don't just mean people like Trotsky. I mean people within the government, people within the financial and business communities at that time. There were various financiers and various business people and various people connected with the liberal parties. They even had a slogan: "The worse things are, the better." I mean, that was very much their sort of way of thinking, because they thought, you see, if that happens, then we can push the Tsar and the government aside and we'll take over and we'll be in charge. And what they discovered is that they weren't in charge, that other people much harder than themselves actually were. So it works at many levels. I mean, it was a cataclysmic event for the country. And of course, we could very well end up with a cataclysmic event now. But, I do wonder, whether some of the people today in the West who are deliberately, who want to see chaos, fully understand its implications. They always think they can control it, and it always spirals out of their hands. And then when they find that the chaos is there, they find that the solution, if it's a solution, is not imposed by them. It's imposed by others who have no time for them at all. So that's always the risk they run. Chaos is a very difficult thing to control. And if it gets out of control, well, it can end up disastrously.
Yeah. Yuri Bezimov said it's the useful idiots that are always the first ones to get...
Well, it's interesting that he said that, because one of the things I would say about this, and this is a point which I've made many times, is that many of these people who are in charge or think they're in charge think that they are incredibly clever, but in reality they are not. They are complete fools. And that's the other danger in all of this. And that also, by the way, reminds me a bit of pre-revolutionary Russia, where you saw all sorts of strange characters floating around in the system, actively engineering these various processes, thinking that they were very, very clever and thinking that what they were doing was going to work out well for them. And of course, they proved to be fools, and certainly idiots, and certainly some people's useful idiots. So there you go. It's always a very, very bad idea to play with these things. But we're going a bit, perhaps.
Yeah, let's get to some questions. Let's hear what people. Yeah. Let's get to the questions here. Let's see what people are talking about on the live stream. Once again, thank you to everybody that is joining us. Hit that like, Valies, Zariel, GEC, and of course, Spartan Warrior Queen. Thank you very much, guys, for helping moderate this. And where should we start? How about we go to super chats, and then we'll get to the live stream, to chatter in the live stream. Let's see. We have Valies opened it up with the $20 super chat. Thank you very much, Valies. Christy is a new member to the Duran community. Welcome, Christy. Adam McLean says, if the UK dumps NIP, would Dublin government fall if the EU impose a border in Northern Ireland, ROI, French coast, plus big tariffs on UK trade?
Yeah,
will anti-EU government with Sinn Féin form Irish exit?
You're right. I'm going to say straight away that I am not as familiar with Irish politics to be able to answer that question in any kind of definitive way. But I'm going to say this is a good example of what we've just been talking about, which is it's quite clear to me that the EU has been using this issue of the Irish border, firstly, to try and keep Britain within the European single market. That was what the backstop in Theresa May's ghastly draft agreement was all about. And now to try to create trouble between Britain and Ireland, and to try to pull Britain back into the EU structures, which is what the Northern Ireland Protocol in the withdrawal agreement is all about. But again, they need to be very careful what they wish for, because I can very easily see how this can unravel and backfire on them horribly, because it is absolutely true that Ireland is deeply interconnected with Britain economically. I mean, Britain is by far Ireland's major trading partner. I mean, you only have to look at the geography to see it and to understand that. And it's entirely possible that if we end up in a situation where there's going to be a hard border in Ireland between North and South, and I want to stress again, the only people who are threatening a hard border is the EU. The British government's position all along has been, we can sort this out, we can find all kinds of ways to allow people and goods to move backwards and forwards, we can set up all kinds of electronic checking systems and all of that sort of thing. It's the EU which says, no, if Britain leaves completely, there has to be a hard border, because and brings Northern Ireland with it. There has to be a hard border. We need that in order to protect the single market, the European single market. If the EU imposes a hard border, then that I can very easily see that it could cause massive economic problems in Southern Ireland, in the Irish Republic, and that might indeed have big political consequences in the Irish Republic. I could see that very, very easily. Now, whether that would trigger a situation where a new government, potentially perhaps including Sinn Féin, which, by the way, my encounter with Sinn Féin people in Northern Ireland made me feel that they were, if anything, a rather pro-European party. But it's conceivable whether an economic crisis in Ireland as a result of the hard border might lead to a change of power in Dublin, with a Irish government deciding to go for to take Ireland out of the EU. That I don't know. I would have thought politically very difficult. And I would have thought it'd be politically very difficult for some Irish people also to go where Britain, the old enemy, has gone ahead of them. Having said that, I don't exclude it, because what does Ireland do in that kind of situation? I mean, given how interconnected the two economies and the two countries, by the way, are. So what the EU is doing is it's creating major problems for one of its own member states, and it is potentially creating destabilization in that member state in a way that shows how reckless and irresponsible the people in Brussels are. Anyway, that's all I can say. I don't know.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I don't know what the outcome will be. Maybe a kind of Irish exit is possible. That might be one solution. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's totally reckless and irresponsible what they're doing.
Yeah, but listening to you and reading the stories from Ireland, what's going on, this sounds to me like it is the same EU tactics that they used against Ukraine. I'm not saying you're going to get the same outcome with Ukraine, but there was a time with Ukraine in 2013 when the EU gave Ukraine the same type of, you're either with us or you're against us. In other words, Russia said you can be in our economic union, but you can also be in the EU sphere as well. That was what Russia told Ukraine at the time. You can be in both. And what did Barroso and the EU say to Ukraine? They said, no, you're either with us or you're out. And then it's full on economic war. That was the terms that the EU gave to Ukraine. and listening to you talk about Ireland and what's going on, they're using the same type of tactics against Ireland and Britain. The same exact thing. No compromise. You can't be in both. There's no room for a compromise solution. You're either with us or you're against us.
Exactly, which is, of course,
So
by the way,
Ireland has to be very careful because
Absolutely.
the EU wants this chaos. They want to see Ireland fall apart.
Well, and that is exactly right. The EU never compromises in these things. They come along. I covered the Ukraine affair remarkably closely, and I remember this very well. How the EU negotiated this again, this utterly impossible association agreement between Ukraine and the EU, which, by the way, the irony of ironies, it's never been properly implemented. So, I mean, it was all about nothing ultimately. But they said, we are not prepared to change a comma, a punctuation mark in it. You have got to go with it. And that means if you have to close off your trade with Russia, so be it. It's either that or nothing. And as you absolutely rightly say, they're saying exactly the same thing to Ireland, even though taking that hardline position is itself destabilizing Ireland. And if Ireland is destabilized, they will do exactly what they did with Ukraine. They will say, well, it's not our fault that Ukraine is, well, they say, it's not our fault Ukraine's become destabilized. It's Russia's fault. And if Ireland becomes destabilized, they won't say it's our fault that Ireland has been destabilized. They'll say it's Britain's fault, or to be precise, Boris Johnson's fault. And that's what they always do.
Same tricks. All right. Alan Watson says, what do you think of the silence regarding the Batley teacher in hiding during the by-election in Batley?
Well, there's a huge amount going on about the Batley by-election.
I have to give a little bit of context.
Yeah, I mean,
for me,
right.
Yeah.
Right. This is can I just explain? By-elections are what happens when a British MP, a member of Parliament, either steps down or retires or dies during the period between elections, general elections. So every so often, an MP retires or leaves, and there has to be a by-election in order to elect a new member to represent that seat in the House of Commons. Now, Batley and Spen is a British constituency, a seat, an area in England which has been dominated by the Labour Party. The Labour Party was very much the dominant party there. And a MP, the local MP who was Labour, quit the position in order to take up another post. And that created a by-election. And it became very, very important to the Labour Party that it win that by-election, because if you remember, they lost a by-election a few weeks ago in another place called Hartlepool, which was very Labour, and this created a crisis for Keir Starmer's leadership. And a lot of people were saying that if Labour were to lose in Batley and Spen, then that would also create a crisis for Starmer, and indeed he might have to resign. So this is a very, very tough by-election for Labour. And they were facing challenges from two flanks. On the one hand, there were the Conservatives, and I should say Batley and Spen is one of those regions in England which voted for Brexit. So so they were facing a challenge from the Conservatives, which is partly, again, trying to capitalize on the anger many people in these sort of constituencies feel about the fact that the Labour Party essentially opposed Brexit. And the other was from George Galloway, who is a perennial figure in British politics, who ran as an independent, as somebody to the left, as a sort of true Labour figure against the Labour Party. And he also was saying that he supported Brexit. In fact, he did support Brexit. This is a very important by-election, one which the Labour Party had to win if Starmer was to remain in office. And the Labour majority had been a very big one in 2017. Labour won the election in 2017. Labour won 55% of the vote. And though their vote fell very substantially, as I said, in 2017, it was 55%. In 2019, in the general election, it was 42%. It fell to 35%. The Labour candidate held on over the Conservative by just 300 votes. which is tiny. Now, there have been lots of problems, and you won't see about this in the media because they don't want to talk about it. They talk about how Keir Starmer, whom the media supports, won a great and famous victory in Batley and Spen. But, for example, a victory by this very narrow margin entitles the candidates to ask for a recount. And this time, uniquely, that was rejected. Then half the votes in this by-election were postal ballots. And when I spoke about the election a short time ago, where the truck suddenly appeared with all those postal ballots, which changed the outcome at the last moment, it's Batley and Spen I was referring to. That was where it happened. There's also been all sorts of evidence of dirty tricks that were being played, particularly, must be said, by the Labour Party. In fact, almost entirely by the Labour Party, in order to win Batley and Spen. And remember, they control the local council. This incident that has just been referred to in this question is just one of them. But other examples was the Labour officials going around the country, taking down the constituency, taking down posters of opposition candidates, for example. And there were lots of other things. Now, there is a court case about this. Does this all sound incredibly familiar, where it should be? Because, of course, we see all of this anyway, this is a court case. We will see whether the High Court, where this court case is going to go, is going to be rather more interventionist than courts in the United States were. But anyway, that's what's going to happen. This incident with the teacher is just one incident amongst many others. I followed by-elections. There was once a by-election in the area of London where I live, and I experienced what a by-election on the ground was like. And I realized that basically it's no holds barred. But even by that measure, Batley and Spen, by all accounts, it was an extreme case. Will the High Court look into this? We'll see. They have done in the past. They have ordered elections to be held again. They have said that the winning candidate, acted inappropriately and must step down. Will they on this occasion, given the very high risks, the very high stakes? We'll see.
So the template now is just, if you're behind by a certain amount of votes, just roll in the trucks. Stop counting and rolling the trucks. That's the template now for the for Europe, the UK, and the United States.
Well,
fantastic.
All I would say about that, by the way, just in addition, is that, of course, the party that is alleged, I have to use that word, alleged to have done this in Batley and Spen is the Labour Party,
of course,
which is, of course, very friendly with the Democrats.
And don't worry, because the Guardian will cover your tracks and the BBC will cover
absolutely.
You'll have the whole mainstream media,
absolutely,
going out and saying that, if you talk about what happened with those trucks that popped up in the middle of the night, you're
absolutely,
you're Orange Man bad, and you're a conspiracy theorist, and you're
indeed. And by the way,
puppet and all these things. Yeah.
And by the way, on the question of Orange Man bad, I mean, you have also again a very concerted media campaign to make Galloway, who is, a controversial and colourful personality, but he's been built up as the sort of ogre. So just as you have an ogre in the presidential election in the US, you have an ogre in the election in Batley and Spen. So, he's been called all sorts of things.
You're smearing him.
They're absolutely all over the place. And I could say, because again, I take an interest in these things, that many of the allegations that have been made against Galloway are factually untrue. But there we go. I mean, you won't find that anywhere in the mainstream media.
Yeah, terrible.
Even though
just the worst of people.
Even though, when I say factually untrue, I mean they are not just factually untrue. They are obviously untrue.
Like Luke Harding's article in The Guardian.
Yeah, well, indeed, exactly.
We may get to that as well, yeah.
We may get
all these guys are, anything that's coming out of these mainstream media journalists at this point in time, I just consider it like, if you're going to read these articles, it's like reading Harry Potter. It's just, it's just pure fiction at this point. They're just making crap up.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Absolutely. Exactly.
All right.
So that's the story of Batley and Sven.
Yeah. Well, I think stories like this are going to be far, far more common than we'd like to have. Darth OP says the U.S. tries to use the Kurds to remove Erdogan from power. The conflict will spill over and drag Syria, Iraq, and Iran into the mix because all of these Kurds won't just stop with Turkey.
Absolutely true. That's completely right. That is so completely true. I mean, if you want to destabilize the whole situation, the whole region in that kind of a way, then you play these sort of games. So the neocons are already talking about they want regime change in Turkey. There will be various mechanisms used to try to achieve that. They'll try and organize protests, of course, by Erdogan's many opponents in Turkey itself and in the cities. And they will try to use the Kurds. And there will be chaos. And these people want chaos. Chaos, as I said, is what they want to see. They affected chaos in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, in Afghanistan. And of course, Turkey is next. At least that's what they would like to see. And it would absolutely correctly, if the Kurds were used in that way, it would not be just a crisis for Turkey. It would be a crisis for Iraq, for Iran, for Syria, and of course, for the Kurds themselves. And yet, this never stops. It's a compulsive thing. And I think it was in a program we did together some time ago, just a short time ago, when I actually read some words that John Bolton, who's very much involved with this new Turkish operation, he actually said, that if chaos ensues, well, that's nothing to do. The United States it's not a problem for the United States. But we achieve our objective of removing the leader that we don't like. What happens afterwards doesn't matter to us.
Geez, these guys.
Yeah,
I swear they just don't go away.
Exactly.
Oh boy. Let's see here. We have from the Election Wizard, 14.99 super chat. To what extent, if any, has race policy and reparations played a role in the South African conflict?
I don't know is the short answer. I mean, I'm on a very steep learning curve with the South African situation. So there's lots of details that I don't know. I mean, what I understand, what I'm increasingly coming to understand, is what a profoundly dysfunctional country South Africa has become. But detail like that, I'm afraid it's possibly the case that we'd be able to answer that, sensibly in a few weeks or even a few days. But at the moment, I just don't know. I mean, I ought to say that I think the whole idea of reparations is a bad one. I mean, it's now become very much, when I say bad one, I mean, it's a terrible one, but it's become very, very much the standard thing now. It's forcing people today to pay for what was done by their ancestors, or what was allegedly done by their ancestors, because how can one ever say that, so-and-so, their person 300 years ago who they might be ultimately lineally descended from was in fact that there's actually any connection. I mean, it's totally unjust. It's profoundly wrong, and it's deeply corrupting, because again, it makes people who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of these reparations, they say, well, we don't have to do anything to improve ourselves. We don't need to work. We don't need to educate ourselves. We don't do anything because we are entitled to all of these things. And that sets communities against each other when in fact they ought to be working together. It's a terrible idea.
That's the point. Communities against each other.
Yeah.
Elaine, thank you for the $10 super chat. Thank you very much for that. From Hunger, we're all aware the biggest global issue is the oligarchy, and Aristotle tells us the only alternatives are democracy or autocracy.
So true. And where will we, which one, where are we going to go? Now, we were talking at the beginning of this program that things can turn out differently from the way people expect. And that, the people who are trying to engineer chaos in the belief that this will consolidate their control and reinforce their oligarchy might find that they're in a completely different situation to the one that they expect. So that's possible that we could end up with, actually, Aristotle didn't use the word autocracy. He used the word tyranny. And tyrannies are terrifying things. I mean, I lived briefly as a child under a dictatorship, and I know what it's like, a really violent dictatorship. So I know what it's like. So, it's not impossible. Democracy, obviously, is a far better route out. But will we achieve it? We have to start remembering again, if we do, what democracy is, and people need to mobilize and organize to make it happen. It doesn't happen by itself. Nobody's going to gift democracy. People have to struggle for it and defend it.
Yeah, that was actually part 1 of 2 from Hunger's message, from Hunger's question. The second part says, how can democracy to win when the people have no vision or strategy? That leaves only one option. Autocracy has a bad name. I prefer leadership.
Oh, absolutely.
Autocracy, leadership.
Well, a leadership, of course, is fully compatible or consistent with democracy. You're going to have strong leaders in democracies. In fact, there's a good case for saying that the strongest leaders are those who emerge from democracies with strong institutions, because they have the greatest degree of legitimacy, and tyrants or dictators always lack that level of leadership that democratically elected leaders have. But that's a different question, which I'm not going to. But I mean, the point about lack of organization, lack of understanding on the part of many people is true. But, one shouldn't despair if one goes back to the United States. Well, 74 million people voted in a certain way in that election last year, and they haven't gone away. And they are perfectly well aware, most of them, I think, of where things are and how things work. So there is a critical mass of people there, more, I suspect, in the US than in Europe at the moment. But you never know. People can come out, people can appear. I can remember 20 years ago in Britain, nobody took Nigel Farage seriously, for example, and emerged as a leader in a particular cause that he had. So maybe the situation will produce someone. As they say, the times bring forth the man. That was, what one used to hear people say, or woman. I mean, but at the moment, I entirely agree. You look around you, you see a desert, a political desert. And that is the most worrying and frightening thing of all.
All right. Thank you, Hunger, for that. From Big Bush Ape Tits 20 pound super sticker. You are amazing. Thank you very much for that super sticker. From Mickey Mouse, a new member to the Duran community. Welcome, Mickey Mouse. From Raul Pinto, $10 super chat. CNBC, Jeffrey Gunlock says, the dollar is doomed over the long term because of rising U.S. deficits. How do you think this will affect geopolitics worldwide?
Well, if the dollar crashes, it's a huge question. But I mean, if the dollar loses its reserve currency status, then the position of the United States as the dominant world power goes with it. I mean, I think the two now are so interconnected that they cannot be separated. And when I say that, I mean, I want to emphasize again the dominant world power. I don't mean that the United States would necessarily stop being a major power, but it could not control things to the extent that it does without the reserve currency position of the dollar. So that is one that that answers, I think, your question. As a geopolitical event, it would be a colossal one. Now, a number of things to say. Firstly, I'm not sure how soon it's going to happen. I mean, sooner or later, everything changes in the world, and at some point, I'm sure that many of the problems that you talked about will become too great, and maybe even for the US itself, if it accepts that it doesn't work in the interests of the American people for it to be a hegemon, they may themselves decide that it doesn't really work for them, for the dollar to be the world's reserve currency. In effect, what that does is it obliges the US to run a trade deficit, which arguably undermines American industries and American jobs. So I could see that from an American point of view, an American population's point of view, that may be something they might want themselves to give up. But how soon it's going to happen and in what form, I don't know. I think the points you're making about rising deficits, rising credit emission, the policies that we see being followed, they do work to undermine the dollar. But firstly, if you're going to see the dollar lose its position as the world's reserve currency, be very clear that will come, if it happens soonish, and it happens suddenly, that will come with a global economic shock, the like of which we've not seen. So I mean, that's the first thing to say. It won't just impact on the United States. I mean, it will affect the whole pattern of world trade. And secondly, there has to be something to put in its place eventually. Now, what that will be, whether it will be gold, the various cryptocurrencies that we're seeing, something else, another currency of another country, I don't, that is at the moment an unanswered question. So these are big things to say. I mean, I think eventually, I don't like the word doomed, but I think eventually the dollar will lose that status. How it happens, how soon it will happen, I don't know. Under whom it happens, I don't know. It would be an enormous shock, especially if it wasn't handled well and it was done abruptly. And what will take its place, again, I can't say. So there's the geopolitical dimension, but there is, of course, the effect it would have on everybody around the world.
Yeah, the Takuza says the collapse of the US dollar will have the same effect as the collapse of 90s Russia, even more.
No.
Even more. It could either move the world towards some sort of better direction over time, possibly, or it could move the world towards just absolute anarchy,
well,
chaos,
absolute
conflict, God knows what, especially with the leadership we have today.
Well,
I don't know who would be able to steer the world through something like that.
I was going to say, I mean, I know lots of people, critical of the US, and they want to see the dollar to resume its reserve status, lose its reserve status. All I would say, again, it's a good example of be very careful what you wish for. If this is done suddenly and without anything there to put in its place, then, well, indeed, then you will. Alex talked about 1990s Russia, 90s Russia globally. We could all find ourselves there. I mean, 1990s in Russia was very bad. It was very good for other people in other places. Always remember that. But if you do that across, then it could easily happen across the whole world. I mean, you could see world trade collapse. I mean, I'm not talking about globalization, we shouldn't link that to world trade. I think that's a false analogy the globalists want to make. But world trade could easily collapse. And 2008 would look like a picnic, frankly.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. From John, £5 super chat. Both climate change and pandemic are real, exaggerated 100x, only explorable via computer models. Solutions are worse than the problems. Pattern? ?
Well, I know an awful lot of people say that the solutions, at least the solutions we've been talking about, are worse than the problem, and it applies to both. I've been reading all kinds of articles recently in parts of the British media, for example, would say that this idea to go towards a carbon zero economy by 2030 or 2040 or whenever it is not just unrealistic. It's actually going to be extremely damaging to the fabric of the economy and of the society in Britain. And we've discussed in many programs now the way in which the attempts to supposedly solve the pandemic are creating all kinds of problems with surveillance states, passports, restrictions on people's lives, inability to go to, for people to enjoy themselves, to live their lives, that we've discussed many times, with no end in sight. So all of that is true. I understand that. I completely take that. Now, whether that is something that people plan, well, I say again what I always say. I don't know to what extent these things are planned, but they do correspond with the agendas that some people are known to have. And either you believe that's a coincidence or you don't.
Yeah.
And given what I have to be, given where we're, again, the platform we're on, I that's all I think I can say.
Yeah. Talking about platform, Vegetables Goes Off says, the first Duran video I've been recommended by YouTube in 6+ months. Yeah, guys, check your subscriptions, check your notification bells. YouTube just completely, they're just at war with us. I don't know what we did except try to, get the truth out there, but they're definitely at war with us. Check your subscriptions, check everything, hit that like button, guys, and check us out on Locals and Super U and Rumble, BitChute, ODYSEE. They don't mess around with notifications and stuff like that. So anyway,
and I just very quickly add in parenthesis, we have some plans for those other platforms which we will be unveiling in due course.
Yes, absolutely. All right, thank you for that comment. I always forget to say hit the like and do stuff like that, but hit the like. All right, Rich says, a recent article on The Economist said that the winning Italian team at Euro 2020 had all ethnic Italians, and it served the purpose of Italian right. Insane. Yeah, that's just...
I know. I mean, I find that a deeply offensive, actually, an insulting article. I mean, it also shows you how troubled some people are. Is all I can say. That in relation to a sporting competition, they could come up with a thing like that, which is so insulting and offensive to the people of Italy. I mean, what it basically says is, it would have been better for Italy to have lost because of their team was composed in a certain way. What kind of a thing is that to say? I mean, how outrageous is that?
Yeah. That article really pissed me off too.
Absolutely. I mean, I was deeply angered and offended by it. I'm sure a lot of Italian people have been too.
Well, once again, Alexander, the goal is also to ruin and destroy sports. Once you bring stuff like that into it.
Well, I mean, can I just say something? I mean, I've never pretended to be much of a sports person, but I remember how sports were, and I see how they become at so many different levels now. And again, it's extraordinary to see how this is very much, again, a feature of ideologically obsessed people. Their obsessions invade everything. Even sports, even football, even athletics, everything have to be shaped around their agendas. And that's so bad.
Yeah. They bring the identity politics and all that stuff into everything. It just makes everything so toxic. And all they do is they think about it. Okay, the Italian team had Italians. All right. And if it had people who immigrated to Italy, that's also fine. If they embrace Italy and they embrace the Italian culture, the Italian language, that's great. Alexander the Great once said, I consider the Hellenic world, I consider it to be the people that embrace the Hellenic world, the language, and the culture. Exactly. That is what Alexander the Great said. And, Alexander the Great knew a thing or two, but that's the whole point. If they embrace the culture, if they embrace the country, then why do you have to make such a damn big issue out of all of these things?
I know. I mean, it's exhausting, and it's exhausting, and at the same time, it's offensive, and it explains why so much is going wrong.
Yeah.
Anyway, if there's
in Greece you have Yannis who plays for the NBA. I believe he's from a Nigerian family, but he embraced Greece. His mother named the 3 kids with a Greek name, and people in Greeks love him. And he's Greek.
Absolutely.
You're not going to argue the fact that he's not Greek. He is Greek.
Exactly.
And he plays for the Greek team. Period. End of story.
End of story.
End of story.
As I said, it's not something anybody thinks about.
Yeah, no one thinks about it.
Except some people in the economists who worry, about me. Anyway,
we're getting off course. All right.
Just to say, I mean, to any people from Italy who are watching this program, please don't think this is how most people in Britain are thinking or in England are thinking. I mean, the general consensus in England was, and I'm quite certain about this, there was a good game. And Italy deserved to win. That's all.
My philosophy at all this is it's football. It could go either way.
Yeah.
It could go, especially when you get to penalties.
Absolutely. But there's most people in England, and I think this is true, feel that we did very well in the first half. The Italians did better in the second, and they were better also in extra time. That's what most of my friends have said. So I pass on, and that's all. That's all one should say.
Exactly. Penalties are tough, man. It's tough. Anyway, from Basha 999, the agenda is playing out in the UK with increasing distinctions between the elites and the proletariat. With COOF, I stopped myself. With COOF restrictions only applying to prowls, all pigs are equal, etc.
Well, YouTube
might have taken this stream down. Anyway, go on.
You put some of your words. Some of your words are very strong, but the sentiments are. What can I say? I mean, I go along with to a great extent.
All right. Basha B says Barnier was recorded in 2017 stating that the Northern Ireland border would be weaponized as a counter to Brexit.
He was indeed.
Used to be easily found on YouTube and Facebook.
Not anymore. But you're absolutely right. You have to plow through old copies of the newspaper, especially the Telegraph, the Daily Telegraph, which is the only mainstream British newspaper that basically supported Brexit. They're not always very strongly, but you have to go through their archive to find in Britain today references to that. But Barnier did say that, and it's absolutely true. And Theresa May went along with it. I mean, that's an important point to make. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, the EU couldn't have done this by themselves. I mean, Theresa May and the British. Theresa May should have said to Barnier, "I'm not prepared to talk about such things. This is not something that I'm going to negotiate with you. It's a strictly internal affair of Britain's. Period. Full stop. End of discussion."
Neil O'Keefe, £10 super chat. Thank you very much, Neil, for that. Adam McLean says the UK afraid to impound EU boats or sitting on their hands? ?
Well, you must understand that here in Britain, we still have a government which is extremely disorganized on this issue. Many people have different views. Prime Minister is clearly under a great deal of pressure. And there are some people who are definitely maneuvering, I think, within the government to prevent him acting possibly in the way that he would like to do, though I'm not even sure that even he does. So basically, you are right that the British government on this issue perhaps is not as firm as it should be or could be. But that is the reality. I mean, every step of the Brexit battle has had to be fought for. And that still continues today. I mean, it's not finished by any means.
All right. Anatoly says, celebrating my grandmother's 94th birthday today. Hope she stays with us for many more years to come. Well, happy birthday.
Absolutely. And best wishes. And my goodness, what that lady has seen.
Yes. Thank you very much for that. Wade Wellington says, JP Morgan, Citi, and other banks may face suit in the UK for alleged exchange rigging. May I have your introspection?
All I will say about that is this. We every so often we get all kinds of cases that appear in Britain. Remember, we got the City of London here, so we're one of the world's big financial centres. Some people say that in some things we're the biggest world financial centre, though not in others. But, we get all kinds of cases, and there's a huge amount of talk and excitement about them. And then things happen, and somehow nothing seems to happen. I mean, so don't hold great expectations of this. What I would say is that the British authorities, and that means also the British legal authorities, tend to look to solve these problems, not so much by pursuing them through to their conclusion, but by doing deals. In other words, getting fines and things. So I wouldn't have very high expectations. A couple of years ago, there was the so-called Libor scandal, which is all about rigging markets. Again, I remember all sorts of very big players were implicated in that, and that caused a huge amount of excitement, and nothing happened.
Nothing happened. Yeah. From maybe they'll throw someone under the bus just to feed red meat to the people, but the real big dogs, nothing happens to them. From Luis Cabrera, hello from Sydney. Thank you very much, Luis, for that super chat. From Anatoly, Alexander, the Bolsheviks won because they were completely uncompromising. What does that say about the future of the EU?
Well, they are pretty uncompromising too, but they're also incompetent. And can I just also add that, and this is a point I always make, I mean, if you compare the leaders of the EU, people like Ursula von der Leyen and all the rest, with Michel Barnier and all the rest, with Lenin, I mean, it just demonstrates, I think, the underlying point that I made. These people, if they create these kind of problems, what they will find is they can't control them, and they don't have the charisma and the force of personality and the drive and the energy and the focus and the discipline to control them. Lenin did. I mean, whatever you may think about him, he was a force. These people are just too incompetent and too stupid, to say it as it really is, to control the situation in the same way. Useful idiots, that's probably more what they are.
Erdogan had her figured out. That's why he put her to sit on the sofa.
Yeah.
He had her figured out. Yeah. He had both of them figured out. That's why he put that chair there, to see who was going to sit in that chair and who he was going to ridicule.
Absolutely. I once heard a story about the Bolsheviks. I once read it somewhere that, the Bolsheviks were so hard you could make nails out of them. Well, just look at the EU leaders. Could you even imagine saying something like that about them?
Yeah. From where am I? From Caroline Jones. What's the latest with the audit in Maricopa County? Yes.
I don't.
You're not giving us anything, is what?
No, exactly. I know.
What does that tell you?
Well, exactly. We don't. I mean, let's see. I mean, these are all. There's a very interesting pattern now starting to appear, and this is all coming alongside a number of very interesting court cases, and which are also starting to happen. Some of them about information and attempts to control information. I mean, Donald Trump's case, for example. And of course, there's also this big battle about electoral changes, with the administration taking one line and local houses of representatives taking another. I think we are at the early stages of this process, but a lot could come together, and we could see some very interesting things probably starting to emerge next year. I would reckon it would. I always said when, at the end of last year, that it would take it needed about a year for all the evidence to come to light, all the information to come together. So let's wait and see. Let's give it a bit more time anyway.
Yeah. From David Nadig 499 super chat. Thank you very much. Nancy, a new member to the Duran community. Welcome, Nancy. Thank you very much for joining. From Sanjeva, what do you think of the Guardian's agenda? What do you think the Guardian's agenda is with the new crap about Russia helping Trump? I think it's all about flagging circulation and relevancy for Luke Harding. Yeah, we
Well,
that.
I think there's multiple things. I mean, one of the things about the Guardian at the moment is that, of course, they went out very far out on a line over their Russiagate coverage. There's been lots of criticisms of Luke Harding in particular. So it's partly about bolstering their circulation, obviously, and it's also about Luke Harding saving his reputation. Not that he has one to save, as far as I'm concerned, but that's one small thing. But I think there is another agenda here, which is partly the concerns that are starting to spread about the direction of American politics and about 2022. And I think this is all about that. What I will say is very interesting. And by the way, I've done a program about this, and I've actually looked at this document and I've discussed it for my own channel. But what I would say about it is that it's very, very interesting that most of the media isn't touching it. So I think they sense that this thing isn't really going to fly, and that if they go along with Luke Harding on documents like this, they'll end up with egg on their face. So that's what I sense. But I think this is mainly about 2022.
All about Trump.
Yeah.
He lives in their brain 24/7 to this day.
Absolutely. I entirely so.
Yeah. Sanjeva has a follow-up on that. He says, on the same theme, why did the Guardian leave the working class? I believed in it during the 90s and Bush era. What happened to left newspapers? Well,
you tell me. I'd love to know the answer. I remember the Guardian as it was, and it was a great newspaper. I didn't always agree with it, by the way. I mean, I often found many of its comments completely wrong, but it was a newspaper of, it seemed to me, genuine quality and genuine integrity. And in fact, it was in the 90s that I began to see it change. It became Clintonized and Blairized, and it's moved ever further in that direction ever since. And what it has become essentially now, it seems to me, is the British mouthpiece of the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party and of the Blair wing of the Labour Party. And that has absolutely nothing to do with working class people, most of whom now, or increasing numbers of whom now, in the United States vote Republican, and in Britain vote Conservative. So, you know, the Guardian has nothing to do with that any longer. As I said, it still appeals to a kind of metropolitan readership in Britain, especially based in London, who are the people who you go out on Twitter and support Starmer and go after Trump and do all of those sort of things. But straightforwardly, I think it carries ever less traction in Britain itself.
Yeah, Irish Partisan. Hey guys, do you think attempted U.S. regime change operation against Cuba is part of a wider campaign against Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, and Haiti?
You know, very good question. We discussed this, and in fact, Alex made the point on our program that it did seem as if, with the US possibly starting to edge out of some of the further reaches of its, far-flung imperium, Afghanistan, possibly Iraq, possibly Syria, that they might be trying to tighten up control of their near abroad, as the Russians would call it. And that might explain why things are happening, very strange things are happening in Haiti, and why some of these events are happening in Cuba too. So, that's entirely plausible. Now, it would make a lot of sense. And it is, by the way, what great powers that sort of draw back from their farthest advances, what they tend to do, they tend to go out of their way to consolidate control of their of their inner core of states. So that's entirely possible. What I would say is, and without in any way disputing that the US or people in the US have been encouraging and to a great extent inciting and orchestrating and organizing these protests in Cuba, as with most color revolution exercises, they're only able to work because there are people in the country itself who are very unhappy and very stressed and they are unhappy and stressed because of fundamental problems about the way in which Cuba itself is governed. Now, that's not always a popular thing to say with many people, but it is true. I mean, I haven't been to Cuba myself, but I know many people who have, and the descriptions of life there and the hardships of life are very, very real and very acute. And they've been true for a very long time. And over the last year, they've got radically worse, partly because of the pressure on Cuba from the United States, but also because of things the government itself is doing or has failed to do.
Okay, Anatoly asks, how is Mr. Blair doing with the British public these days? Seems to be mending his public image skillfully.
Well, I'm going to, this is very interesting because, you know, that segues very well into what we were saying about The Guardian. He is still got, and it's always important to remember this about Blair, he still has and always has done, he always has had the support of The Guardian and its North London readership. Those sort of people still are devoted to him. For them, he remains the ideal prime minister. He embodies what they see themselves as and what they feel. But if you're talking about the wider British population, they don't like Tony Blair at all. And that's perhaps something that The Guardian and the North London elite don't understand. So yes, he's been coming out of his shell. He's been trying to restore his reputation. He's been trying to maneuver in a way that demonstrates his enormous influence still on the British Labour Party, which I never doubted, by the way, especially the Parliamentary Labour Party. But his rise or his return is one of the reasons for Labour's problems, because people see Blair coming back, they see the Labour Party coming back, and they say, we don't want to have anything to do with them.
Tony Blair is taking the place of Bill Gates. That's my opinion. And while Tony Blair may have been unpopular with the British public, i.e. facing the consumer, we can't forget that the minute Blair left office, he was very popular as a consultant dealing with world leaders, and he made Alexander a crap load of money.
He's a multi-millionaire. If you see the houses he owns and the other properties he owns, absolutely. No, he is a fully paid up member of the British oligarchy. As I said, it's important to say, and not just the British oligarchy, the world oligarchy. It's important to stress, though, as I said, he never went away. That's the thing to understand about Blair. He was always there. He's just become a little bit more visible now. But he was never really gone. His influence in British politics and on the Labour Party continued to be pervasive.
Yeah, from Ernesto, we are on holiday here in Chile. Quite fun to start the day watching you guys. You are the best for sure. Thank you, Ernesto, and enjoy your holiday in Chile. Where are we? Fiat Luxalut says, can we talk about the ideology behind all of the deconstruction of society and why it is being deployed?
Well, that's an enormous subject. That is a Titanic stuff.
Yeah.
That's not just a video. That's a documentary or a program. I mean, there are many elements that make this up. I mean, one of them is these ideas that began to appear in Europe, especially Europe, in the 60s, and which then got exported to the US. Deconstruction, post-structuralism, postmodernism. This idea that you could shape ideas, you could create narratives in place of facts, that the world runs on narratives in place of facts. And of course, there is also the view, which I only partly share, that that this was also taken up by some Marxists in the United States, that they gave up on thinking they could mobilize the working class, and they took up the ideas of Gramsci of a march through the institutions, and the idea to capture the universities, capture business, and try and impose their ideas downward through that way, and that these two concepts met. The sort of post-structuralist, deconstructionist ideas that came from the French, and the idea of marching through the institutions that came from Marxists, mainly in the United States. But, you know, this is such a titanic subject. But suffice to say this, deconstruction is ultimately, and in its origins, a philosophical theory. It's one, as I said, that comes from France. It basically says that nothing has any real reality, that you can break everything down, that, you know, for example, there was a famous article by Derrida, one of the...
You said nothing has any real reality?
Absolutely. I will give an example. I mean, I think it was Derrida who actually said that the Iraq war never happened. I mean, it was just something that appeared in the media. It was just a narrative. So everything ultimately has no factual reality, because everything can be controlled as a kind of constant narrative stream. I mean, these ideas, by the way, are still very influential in academic circles. My wife is an academic and works in the field of literary theory. She is extremely familiar with them, and that's, I think, where a lot of these ideas that we see today which have evolved into a new kind of ideology. I think this is where they all come from. The idea that you can shape facts, you can control, that facts don't really exist, that narratives is all that exists are narratives. He who controls the narrative ultimately rules the world. That's basically what the idea is. And because facts don't exist, or the underpinnings that are constructed around facts, they don't exist either. So, you know, you can control everything by controlling people's perceptions. It's a complicated topic, one that needs to be discussed at much greater length, but it is, I think, something that some people in Davos, or educated people, have taken up and worked with and moved forward with. So there you go.
Yeah. Kaiser Sose says, nothing new about it, Alex. He who controls the past controls the present. Yes, I believe it was Sergey Brin, Alexander, or Larry Page of Google, that said, he who controls information will control the world. Absolutely.
The quote that the other person made is from Orwell, from 1984. He who controls the past, he who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the past controls the future. So the idea is you use the present, you control the narrative about the past. By controlling the past, you can shape the future too. So that was from Orwell. But I mean, it has deeper origins anyway. You can go all the way back to the Greek sophists, who, you know, Plato and Socrates were opposed to, and they had ideas that were not entirely dissimilar from that. But this is not entirely new, but it has never been elaborated to the extent that it has been today. And as I said, so there's deconstruction, post-structuralism, postmodernism on the one hand, and on the other hand, as I said, the Gramscian idea. And Gramsci, by the way, was attracted to Gramsci, for those who don't know, was an Italian communist who was very active in the 30s and 40s and wrote compendiously, and his ideas are very influential amongst parts of the left. But he had this idea of hegemonism, the idea that, you know, you can, if you gain control of the institutions, including the academic institutions, you can establish your position by imposing your ideas on everyone else. And some of these two streams came together.
That's what's happened in the US to a large extent.
Well, indeed. Yeah. But when people talk about cultural Marxism, I mean, the Marxism part of it is Gramsci. The cultural part of it is, as I said, post-structuralism and postmodernism and all those things.
Yeah. Well, we should probably do a video on that.
It's a very complicated.
It's very fascinating.
Well, it's a fascinating subject. I'm going to say this. I mean, I'm not a person who is perhaps finds it is entirely comfortable talking about these very abstract things. I have a rather skeptical mind, if I can put it like that. But certainly we can do a program about it. And we can see whether perhaps we can invite people who are more, shall we say, involved in the battle of ideas and who can explain this really well and from an academic angle too. So let's think about doing that one day.
All right. 1,000 likes already. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Way to go, guys. Thank you very much to everybody that hit that like. Thank you very, very much. Biscuit Rage says they do the identity politics diversity thing because it is the imposed future. EU wanting 70 million Africans imported.
Well, I don't know what the EU, of course, would deny that is what they want. But I always say this, what they want is one thing, but the effect of what they do, the result of their policies, is there for us to see. The fact is, one of the consequences of the EU is that there is no country that is a part of the EU is able to control its borders anymore. That decision is made centrally, and we saw what happened in 2015. Angela Merkel and the EU combine in Brussels decided that Europe's doors should be thrown open, and it was, and a million people came. Now that they had to take some steps to control that because the reaction was so strong in Germany, especially. But that perhaps tells us more than what they say. Always the actions matter more than the words, especially with someone like Merkel, by the way.
Now she's stuck having to pay off Erdogan every year or two.
Absolutely.
What a bonehead move that was from Angela Merkel.
I know.
What a bonehead move. Doesn't she have advisors? Doesn't she have anybody telling her, hey, Angela, maybe that's not the brightest idea. Maybe X, Y, and Z is going to happen if you do that.
She has heaps of advisors. She speaks to lots of people, but she makes many decisions by herself in secret. She's a very, very secretive person. I mean, Merkel is a fascinating case study. Can I just say a person who has to an extreme is the opposite of the person she wants people to think she is. I mean, the image is of the Schwabian housewife, the straightforward, honest, decent person. The reality of Merkel is of a very, very cunning, manipulative intriguer who operates a lot behind the scenes and who, as such people have to do, makes many of her decisions in secret.
Yeah. Marley Bedford, $7.99 super sticker. Thank you very much for that super sticker, Marley. Let's keep this rolling. We got a lot of questions from John, £5 super chat. Thank you very much, Jan, for that. From Ryan, $4.99. With the downfall occurring the last 17 months, what would you say is the most problematic event, ramifications moving forward? The most problematic
of the last 17 months,
with everything that's happened. Specifically the coup and lockdowns, I imagine, and all these things that are going on. What's the most problematic going forward, I guess, is
I have to be very careful what I say here.
Can I give you my thought real quick?
Yeah, of course.
The surveillance is what worries me.
I would say the events during the election in the United States last year. Yeah. Beyond any equivocation.
We said it during a show that what happened in November is going to shake the future of the world.
Yes.
And, I think we're starting to see that.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for that super chat and that question there from Paula, €10 super chat. Isn't all what's going on to install AI? Thanks for all the research you both are doing.
Well, AI, I think, for the moment, is a tool. And we got it, exactly. I mean, it's a tool. The problem is not, I think, the technology. It's the uses some people hope to make with it. I mean, it's what they're trying to do with it. Now, and it's always the people we need to think about, because behind every camera, behind every program, behind all of these things, there is a person somewhere. That's always the important thing to understand.
Very well said. Very well said. Don't buy into the whole, it's an algorithm. Whenever they say that, oh, it's an algorithm, the algorithm did that. Algorithms are programmed by people. There are managers that tell the programs to create an algorithm that does X, Y, and Z. And there's managers above those managers and CEOs who say, I want this to happen, and I want that person to be censored, and I want this person to be surveilled. So create that algorithm. So every time they say, it's just an algorithm, it's just AI. No. There are people making conscious decisions to program these things. They know what they're doing. The programmers may be just like, look, I'm just doing my job. But there are people who are setting this stuff out there.
Absolutely.
Well said. It is the people behind this stuff. All right. Kurt says, I would like to ask Alexander how he feels about not being able to discuss the shots and the coup, etc. Alex discussing it on his channel. Well, I did a video on it, on Greece and France, Alexander. Then we did a video as well, the same day, actually, on Greece and France. But we also included Spain and many of the human rights legalities and the constitutional stuff that's going on as well.
I find it utterly exasperating and frustrating, and to be honest, it makes me very angry, because I think that people need to be free to speak about these things. Now, I'm going to say we have noticed a certain relaxation at the moment. The last couple of months and weeks, perhaps the controls are a little less tight than they were. I am more skeptical than some people are about that relaxation. And that's why I am still continue to be very careful. I mean, all I will say about that is this: my training has always made me very skeptical. And I do wonder how long this actually very slight relaxation will last.
I will say it's a relaxation that's, in my opinion, more geared towards talking about the shot and passports. If you're talking about it in a European context, I think if you talk about it in a US context, you're going to get slammed.
Exactly.
Crushed.
Exactly.
For some reason, big tech is hyper focused on people talking about the coup with regards to the US. With Europe, it seems that they're more just, maybe they're just not watching, they're just not caring at this moment.
Yes, but can I just say again, it makes me frustrated, exasperated, and very angry. I think this is one of the biggest events that I can ever remember. It's a global event, remember, too. And people should absolutely have a right to talk about it. And by the way, if they were able to talk about it and they were able to debate it, not only might things be done differently, but I'm pretty sure that one of the reasons why there are protests, and some of those protests are not just very big, but they take a certain direction, and some people do things during those protests, they become more violent than they should be. It's because of the frustration people have that they can't talk about these things freely. That's always the way.
Absolutely. From Megawatt, keep it up, super sticker. Thank you very much for that. From CD90, why ruin and destroy sports? Even Roman emperors couldn't get out of games and bread.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, but you see, ideologues do this. And I mean, before the 20th century, nobody would have thought about trying to use sports as and meddle in sports and interfere in sports to pursue ideological objectives. But in the 20th century, some countries, Soviet Union, began to. But of course, it's now been taken on completely further and with a completely different objective. So that's why you see all these extraordinary things like that article in The Economist, which is really outrageous.
Yeah. From Satoshi Nakamoto, NOK 109. Satoshi, Bitcoin. Send us some Bitcoin, Satoshi. Thank you very much for that super chat. From Adam, is New Zealand Prime Minister Ardern strong enough to bar the UK from CPTPP? The trade.
The trade.
Yes.
I don't know is the short answer. I mean, I will say this. British people, by the way, have a tremendous fondness and liking for New Zealand. And one of my best friends travels there regularly. because her brother-in-law lives there. So, I mean, it's a country I know quite a lot about and have great admiration for. And we always think of them as being strong and strong-minded and tough. Whether the Prime Minister of New Zealand is going to be able to hold out against the British on this, I don't know. Trouble is, behind the British, I suspect, is the United States, or at least some people in the United States. We will see. I mean, it's for the New Zealand people to decide.
Yeah. From Kurt, who asked the previous question about the coup, he says, I was asking my previous question because it is without a doubt the most important topic in our lifetime due to the implications it has on our life.
Absolutely.
And he says super chat as well,
I know.
Talking about implications. Implications. Thank you very much, Kurt, for that.
One of the indications of how important it is how difficult it is to talk about. I mean, if it wasn't something that was important, there wouldn't be any problems. We would be able to talk about it. It's because it is important that we have all the problems talking about it that we do.
Yeah. From Marit, Italy has never got carried away on the American bandwagon like Germany and France, in spite of being in the EU, being one of the EU3. They have friends in Iran, Russia, and China. Guys, we have a great video coming up with a great journalist from Italy. That'll be up over the weekend, just on a side note. So he's going to actually answer a lot of these questions, Rit, that you're posing, because he's on the ground, Alexander.
Indeed, and we're going to be developing a connection with him and with his organization. So please keep an eye out, because we're going to do a lot of programs on Italy. Because I think what you say is basically true. In fact, I think he basically confirmed that is true. He made some very, very telling comments about Italian attitudes to these questions on that program, which I anticipate your question. So wait and see what he says, and we'll be saying an awful lot more, but I think you're basically right.
Yeah, we're going to be having a lot of coverage on Italy, so stay tuned. Guys, from GEC says, earlier Super Chat may have been referring to growing threat of technocracy. I agree. We've been slowly pushed in this direction for decades now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that is true. And definitely there are some people, I mean, the power of people who control technology and the way they're able to control information is unprecedented. I mean, that's even parts of the mainstream media are now admitting that. Even Angela Merkel, for God's sake, has sort of admitted it. So, I mean, that is an indisputable thing. But an further indication of the power is how difficult it is to mobilize and to deal with it. But again, I come back to what I'm saying. I think there's a lot of interesting things happening in the United States at the moment. Unfortunately, it has to be in the United States. Can't happen realistically anywhere else, certainly not in Europe. And as I said, we're going to see court challenges. We're going to see all kinds of things. And it's perhaps worth keeping an eye on these things and looking at them and see how they shape out over the next year or so.
Yeah. From Ian, what's your thoughts on the audit of Arizona and Pennsylvania?
I think we've touched on this already, but
Pennsylvania we didn't mention actually, but no, it's all in the same.
Yeah, bucket. Absolutely. I mean, sooner or later, this is always the problem, and I made it point many times last year, especially with courts that were very, very reluctant to get involved. It's very difficult in the short period of time that people were trying to do things last year to get anything done, given the way in which the legal system works. But things are now changing and time is moving forward, and people are able to go back and look and see and realize that lots of things were done which bear examination. And I predict that before the 2022 elections, we will have an awful lot more information than we get, and there'll be results of audits, not just from Arizona and Pennsylvania, but there's also things going on, I understand, in Georgia. And we're going to find out all kinds of things which many people suspected, and they're going to be confirmed, or at least confirmed in some way.
Yeah. Keep this in mind. Trump is always right in the end, it seems. He has a very strange knack to always be right in the end, and he's always vindicated, it
Yeah.
seems.
Yeah.
So I think he'll be vindicated again.
Yeah.
We'll keep an eye on it. Preparation is power says maybe the one world globalist liberal agenda is the best option available. Like maybe sovereignty is the sacrifice required to avoid World War III. Peace and love.
Yeah, of course, lots of people, but that is the propaganda that one gets. You go to the Guardian. I mean, they always talk in this way, that's the way to achieve universal peace and harmony and the wonderful, great future that we all have. The reality, you look actually what is going on, is the exact opposite. It's more inequality, more war, more chaos, more disruption. So trying to achieve this utopian project, because that is what it is, this deeply ugly and unattractive utopian project, is not bringing about peace, world peace and global harmony. It's doing the opposite, and it will continue to.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the chat. We'll do some questions from the chat. Alexander, how long have we been going for? An hour 35. All right, let's do some questions for the chat, and we'll wind it down. Where are we? Let me go through and see what people are talking about. And we have from Raul, the Wall Street Journal says, U.S. to warn business over rising risks in Hong Kong. Any thoughts on Hong Kong and China's crackdown on it?
Well, I mean, we predicted that there would be a crackdown in Hong Kong at the time when the protests were happening. So I don't think any of us here on the Duran are at all surprised about that event. It is inconceivable that the Chinese government would allow the situation in Hong Kong to spiral out of its control. And I'm sure that Western governments have always known that all along. And I'm also sure that they are, in fact, anxious to use the situation in Hong Kong for their own geopolitical purposes. And there's currently a campaign against China in the United States, and this is part of it. I don't think it's going to make any practical difference. Hong Kong is now being gradually embraced by China, it's falling under Chinese control, and the Chinese have consolidated their control there. And at the same time, as we have all this campaign against China, what is actually happening? The export of Chinese goods to the United States is skyrocketing. The Chinese surplus has increased. So we have all this rhetoric, don't, invest in Hong Kong, don't do any business in Hong Kong, and yet we're buying more goods from China, even as we say things like that. And as I said, actions speak louder than words, and perhaps that's, what do they say, dollars speak loudest of all.
Yeah. Zariel says, maybe the return to a more ethical life, regardless of denomination, would help the world heal and grow together instead of divide and conquer. Zariel for that. Yeah. Well said. We have John, who says, any news from Merkel and Biden over Nord Stream 2? Their meeting.
I've just done a program about it. It should be out, I think, possibly today.
Today.
In
a few hours. In a few hours.
Yeah,
it'll be absolutely on Alexander's channel,
where
he goes into depth on it.
Yeah.
From Sanjeva, love you guys. Listening to you a while I'm on call in the ICU. Awesome. Thank you very much. Good luck with your work, Sanjeva. Let's see some more question here. Do you think the goal of America is to create what was prophesied in the banned movie Gray State? I don't know that movie.
No, I don't know that movie. And we should be very careful when talking about America. I mean, because if we're talking about the policies, for example, of the new administration, of the current administration, I don't think it speaks for America as a whole by any means.
By any means, exactly.
By any means.
Good point. Good point. Where are we here? Richard said USD collapse would open the door wide for Russia and Putin. I don't think Putin wants a USD.
I agree with you, actually, Alex, on this. I don't think that Putin wants to see that happen. I think for the time being, and I'm now really emphasize this point. I think we've got to put aside constantly what people say about Putin and say about Russia, that this idea that the Russians want to destabilize things so that they can conquer things and reassert Russia as a great power. My overwhelming impression of Russian policy at the moment is that it is focused on two things. One, creating a stable political situation within Russia itself. Remember, this country has been through instability on a scale that no Western country can imagine. I mean, after 1905, there was a century of revolution. I mean, this isn't something, and this is something Russians feel very strongly about. So they want stability, and they want economic stability so that they can rebuild their society and their economy and optimize it. And I think that they very much feel that in order to achieve that stability, they want stability in the world as a whole. They don't want to see the United States collapse. They don't want to see necessarily the dollar collapse. They want to see an economic structure that is stable, but not threatening to themselves. That's what they're about. That's, I think, overwhelmingly what they want to see. And if the US pressures them, they will push back in their own protection. But I don't think they aggressively want to see the United States collapse, the dollar system collapse, so that they can move in and take advantage.
Yeah. Jeff Smith says, Jackie Chan has gone full CCP. How much is this to do with his penthouses being seized? Did you hear about that, Jackie Chan?
I did, absolutely.
He's running, or he's part of the party now, or something like that.
Well, of course. I mean, in China, what choice does he have? Being realistic about this, yeah. I mean, the thing about China. I mean, I remember we did a program about a prominent Chinese businessman who had connections with various people in the United States, and it's very interesting how one day he was there, one day he wasn't. I'm not saying that would happen necessarily to Jackie Chan.
You mean a certain president's son?
A certain president's son,
a certain Chinese energy company.
Exactly. So
you know, kind of disappeared. This guy.
Exactly. Yeah. So as I said, to bear in mind, we are talking about China. I don't want to suggest this is commonplace in China, but I do get the sense that Jackie Chan perhaps became, as far as the Chinese government was concerned, a little bit too big for his boots, and so he's been brought down.
Yeah, we saw the same thing with Jack Ma from Alibaba as well. Yeah,
exactly.
BZA, we get this one a lot now. I think about this a lot too, actually. Is Putin going along with the shot insanity? We talked about this during a video with regards to the QR codes and the restrictions that Russia has.
Well, I mean, I think the short answer, straightforward answer is yes. And I mean, I think if you want me to, I mean, of course he would deny the insanity part, but I mean, what we have seen in Russia over the last couple of weeks is a steady pace towards making this compulsory and using QR codes and all the rest to make it so. And again, and this is a point we made on that other program. It's important people don't have illusions about who Putin is and what he represents and what Russia is like. I think a lot of people impose their ideals on it, their own ideas of what they would like it to be. But I don't think it's part of any kind of globalist combine. I think that's at all what Putin is about. But he does want control within his own country, and that's absolutely always been part of his agenda. And if you know about his background and his views, that shouldn't surprise you.
Yeah. From Magnesia, Shan says, Alexander, the Singaporean container ship which burnt and sunk onto the shores of Sri Lanka in a country where you can't chew gum. What is the extent of their accountability?
Well, it should be huge, but will it be? We will see. It's
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean,
the fact that it happened in that's what makes this so unique in a country that exerts so much control over every small little detail of society.
Absolutely. And I mean, logically, I mean, this ought to be a law enforcement person's, dream situation. I can imagine, not to mention the lawyers. I mean, Singapore, by the way, has a very advanced legal system and all that. But we will see what happens.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Go ahead.
it'll be interesting to see how much these things really do happen, and what it actually tells us about the situation there.
All right. Let me read 4 chats in a row.
Yeah.
Real quick. Anne says Trump to address the nation tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Lay out evidence for election improprieties. That I did not know.
No,
Thank
I
you,
didn't
Anne,
know.
for letting us know of that. We will be watching for sure. James says Russia is mirroring the shot policy of the West. I have family there. They are directly affected. Very interesting. And I'll read you 2 more on Putin. Zariel says, I imagine Zariel is talking about Putin, as he is well in his right to want. And then Vasya says, Alexander, most of the Western people don't know what Putin and Russia are.
Absolutely
Those
true.
are 4 quick.
Absolutely true. I mean, the last is actually absolutely right. By the way, it's not difficult. If you want to get your sense and feel of what Putin is, you go onto his the Kremlin's website. The Kremlin has a very, very good website. I mean, I'll say that amongst world governments, it's far and away the most informative. And you learn an awful lot about the kind of person Putin is. You see the kind of speeches he makes, the real comments he makes. Anything you read in the West that Putin is supposed to have said, you can be absolutely sure that he either didn't say it or it's been distorted to mean something completely different. But you get a very real sense, a very good feel of what he's about, and indeed of what the Russian government's about. And if you go to Russia itself, and of course Alex has lived there for a time, it's completely unlike most of what you read in the media. And I mean, Moscow, dare I say it, especially so. But also, I've been around other parts of Russia, and that too. I mean, the claim that that Moscow is this oasis and that the rest of Russia is some sort of primitive 19th century broken down place. I mean, that simply isn't true either.
Yeah, that's not true. But I will say Moscow and Petersburg is fantastic. They are fantastic cities.
Fantastic cities.
They really are.
Yeah. Very modern cities.
Very modern cities. From Kirill, which country do you think will break the EU? Spain, Italy, Greece, or France, or any other country will break the EU?
It could be any one of them. I don't know. Or it could be, as we've discussed many times, that none of them will. And that what will happen eventually will be that there will be an overwhelming structural crisis, and that a breakdown of the currency system or something of that kind in connection with a recession somewhere. I don't know how it will happen, but of one thing I'm absolutely sure: it will eventually happen. That which is unsustainable cannot be sustained. It is something that Margaret Thatcher said. By the way, I think she was quoting someone else, but it is true. And can I also say that, of course, our friends in the EU sense it in their bones. And already you see that they're doing, again, more of the things to try to hold this Frankenstein's monster of a union together. They're now going after Poland. They're meddling in the structure of the Polish court system. There's talk that if Poland doesn't change its court structure, then it might even face expulsion from the EU. And we've had decisions of the European Court of Justice meddling in how the Polish court system
Adam
works.
just came through with a super chat exactly on that, Alexander. So I'm just going to expand on that. Adam says, can the EU force its will on Poland and not cause Pole exit?
No, well, I mean, the idea is what they're actually trying to do is meddle in internal Polish affairs. They know that Poland is divided. I mean, many countries are divided, that the present government has a sort of skeptical attitude to the EU, that's putting it mildly, but that there are many, many people in Poland who are very pro-EU for all kinds of reasons. So they're trying to create trouble for the existing government by making these kind of decisions, telling everybody, well, if this government remains in power and continues as it does, then Poland could lose its position in the EU, in the hope that this will provoke a popular rising or a electoral catastrophe for this government and bring into power a government in Warsaw that is far more subservient to Brussels. That's the agenda. But of course, as with so many other things, this could go very wrong. I mean, the Poles are, a proud nation, that's putting it mildly. They don't like to be dominated by outsiders. They've resisted Germans and Russians. Maybe one day, before very long, they'll start to resist the EU too. And if the EU pushes its luck too far, we could have Pole exit. But I'm absolutely sure that's not what the people in Brussels who are behind this latest court decision want. What they want to do, as I said, is they want to create trouble within Poland for the present Polish government. And by the way, they want to chip it away. They want to bring it down. And then, because Poland has been Hungary's big ally, they will go after Hungary. That's the next step.
Yeah. The EU, they employ the same tricks over and over again, Alexander. They know the countries that are trouble spots. Mm-hmm. They know which politicians could cause trouble. They pick them off one by one. They don't want leaders. They want puppets. And they look at countries and they say, let's focus on Ireland and Portugal and Italy and Spain and Greece, and let's do this to them and that to them. Let's call Tsipras up to Brussels and give him an ultimatum and get him on side. Let's put them under austerity. Let's look at Poland. Let's look at Orban. Let's look at Austria. And they do this on a country by country basis. Yes. And what they want are puppets all around them. They want puppets. Exactly. But you've said it many times. The center of the EU, France and Germany, okay, you have Macron and Merkel and whoever's coming up next. That core is going to be very EU, Brussels loyal. But that table will not be able to stand when you've completely hollowed out and destroyed the periphery. Everything. That model cannot work. But that is the model that the EU employs.
Absolutely correct. That's exactly right. And we see it in operation again. And this is what this court decision on Poland is all about. That's exactly right.
Stand strong, Poland. Stand strong.
Yeah.
From Basha, often wonder how you guys compartmentalize all the sleaze and duplicity you report on. At times, the feeling of powerlessness can be hard to handle.
We don't feel, I don't feel powerless. On the contrary, dare I say it, coming along and doing programs like this and speaking to people, it makes you feel empowered, actually, not powerless. But certainly, I have to say, reading all this stuff all the time can be very depressing. I am not going to pretend it's not. There have been moments, especially last year, dare I say, which were very difficult.
Yeah. From Ian, a nation with no borders is not a nation. Reference to France and British ferrying illegals to Britain. Will this end? ? Well,
the first point, a nation with no borders is no nation, is absolutely true. That is what defines a nation, what defines a state. State which has no borders is not a state. So when you do away with borders, which is what the EU has done, you absolutely hit at the foundation of states, of sovereignty. And in my opinion, states are instrumental in democracy because nations live within states, and they can only exercise their rights as democracies through the institutions of those states. So you do away with the borders, you do away ultimately with democracy itself. That's my view. I think it's logical. I think that's absolutely right. And when states like Britain try to assert control of their borders, well, it's not surprising that people in the EU, and not just the EU, but the whole globalist construct, seek to undermine their attempts to do that, because ultimately that is what their entire objective is. And that's why the reason I oppose it also is because it is ultimately a policy directed against democracy.
Yeah. Michael says, let's pretend that Poland respects human rights, and then let's pretend the EU wants independent nations. Nice fairy tale.
Very nice. Not happening. To be honest, if you did that, if you had a situation where sovereign states were established and the EU respected state rights in that kind of way, then what you would get is something which is not the EU. It's just completely inconsistent with the EU system. Now, what goes on in Poland? there are many things about the present Polish government, by the way, which I don't particularly like. I think they've played a wildly over-ambitious game. in East with Russia. I suspect that there's all sorts of problems with Poland itself. But, this particular issue that the EU has latched onto, it seems to me entirely a Polish one. It's about the structure of the Polish court system. What has that got to do with the EU, or should have to do with the EU, or with human rights? If Polish courts start making decisions which infringe human rights, they start doing to people in Poland what Britain, for example, is doing to Julian Assange, then by all means criticize it. But this isn't that. This is saying, there's this chamber within the High Court, the Supreme Court in Poland, which we don't really like. That's entirely an organizational affair, and it's entirely Poland's business.
Yeah, well said. Good move, bringing up Julian Assange. Maria Thompson with a €5 super sticker. Maria, thank you very much for that. Raul Pinto, do you think this infighting within the EU will lead to a civil war?
The EU? A civil war?
Infighting within the EU.
Well, I think what it will do, I think, if we're talking about the EU, is that it will hopefully lead to its breakup. The way to get a war in the European Union, in Europe, is for the EU to go on doing what it's doing. If it tries to force its ideas on people who don't want it, that sooner or later we will get a breaking point. I don't think it will come to that, because I think the economic structures are so unstable that they will break down before that point is reached.
Yeah, let's do a couple of more questions, Alexander, and we'll wrap it up. From Maddie, what is your opinion on Cuba? We did a video on this, actually.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very complex subject. But I'm going to make a general observation about myself. I mean, I've never, even when I was, very much a person who, social democratic minded, Labour, left voting person back in the 1970s and 80s. Even in those days, to be straightforward about this, I was never quite as taken by Cuba as some people that I knew, most people, everybody that I knew was. Maybe I just don't have that kind of romantic spirit. I mean, I don't know, but I never felt drawn to Cuba in quite that way. I mean, I could always see that there were problems there and that the economy was very heavily dependent. I mean, it worked fairly successfully whilst the Soviets were subsidizing it, but it was never self-supporting, it seemed to me. And I've always, and of course, the nature of the economy, that kind of economic system, can only be maintained or sustained with a very high degree of coercion as well. I mean, again, you have to be realistic about that. All of that seems to be true. At the same time, and I have to say this too, I am deeply opposed to things like sanctions and embargoes and blockades of the sort that the United States has been imposing on Cuba for so long. I think that the way to have handled Cuba was to let itself sort itself out. And I still think that. And I also I fully acknowledge that Cuba has achieved things like education and healthcare, and these are not unimportant things. I think that Cuba at the moment is going through a very complex period of economic reform and a very difficult political transition. I hope personally that it achieves that peacefully, because I think that that is the best route forward towards Cuba achieving the kind of future, and indeed ultimately a democratic future, which the Cuban people deserve. I think if the United States continues with its blockade policy, that will not be good. And I think if the United States tries to facilitate regime change there and perish the thought, intervene directly in the island, which I've seen some people talk about, I think that will be entirely bad. I think leave the Cubans themselves to sort it out. They've achieved some remarkable things, with their health system and their education system. There are a lot of other things to sort out. I think left alone, they will do it.
All right. Magnesia Shan says the H&M Oprah interview is nominated for an Emmy and now the Television Critics Award. This attitude seems to describe the depletion of basic ethics. Is this not a war on the royals?
Well, absolutely. And it's also an example, in my opinion, of the complete collapse of any form of good taste. I mean, dare I say it? I mean, granting a thing like that an Emmy award, I mean, it's just preposterous.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, well said. Thank you for that super chat. And we'll take one or two more questions. Didapong says the big difference in the Sputnik and the West shots is AV is flu-like shot. West versions, the Sputnik 5 is flu-like shot. West versions, highly novel, never tested. Explains the big difference in adverse events and deaths. Might partially explain Putin's choice. So that might.
Well, I've heard a lot of people say. Now, I'm going to say straight away, I'm not in any way going to try and comment on this in any detail because I'm not a scientist. I'm not a person who's receiving any of this. So, I mean, I don't know. But I've heard a lot of people say that. I've heard medical people tell this to me. So quite possibly that's right. Whether it's the reason why Putin is doing this, whether it justifies him doing this, that's also an entirely different matter. But I have heard those things said. I mean, I don't know, as I said, and I want to stress again, I don't know to what extent that is true.
All right. Okay, let's do two more minutes, Alexander. Let me just go through real quick. Let me make sure I got all the super chats answered. And I think I did, yes. And let me just go through real quick just to see if there's anything else, and we'll wrap it all up. Thank you to Zarael, to GEC, to Valley S, and to Spartan Warrior Queen. Thank you guys for moderating. Really appreciate it. Thank you to all the super chats. Thank you to all the questions in general. To everyone that gave us a like and a thumbs up. Guys, check your notifications, check your subscription, and check us out on Locals. Check us out on Locals. We're going to be doing a lot of good stuff there as well. And let's see here. Let's see, Alexander, if there's any other questions that we could just pluck out of this stream real quick. It moves fast. I know.
The
stream was fast. Let's hit 1,500 likes. Yes, let's hit 1,500 likes. Definitely. Let's do that. All right. I guess we'll leave it there. No. I'm trying to go back as far as it lets me go back, but that's all right. We won't push it. 2 hours pretty much on the dot.
And a tremendous program. And what it was extraordinary. I mean, range of things. I mean, all going on to the sort of topics.
Yeah, big range of topics. Here's one, because I saw Alex was asking this earlier, and I just caught it again. What do you think of the garden fence that Lithuania is building? And we'll end it on this one. Lithuania. We'll end it on Lithuania.
I mean, Lithuania, again, a country which, in my opinion, is losing its way. Because, I mean, now they're building up this fence along the border with Belarus. They are very heavily involved in Belarus policies. They're now, quarreling with the US, alongside the US against China. They're going against the EU combinat on that. I mean, first of all, I think the fence in itself is a bad idea, but it also shows how reckless the policy towards Belarus ultimately is, because if they're going to provoke a crisis in Belarus, which seems to be what Lithuania is trying to do, well, presumably they fear the consequences, which is why they're building this fence. Would it not be better, in order to prevent that happening, that wave of people coming, not cause a crisis? I mean, that seems to me far away the more sensible approach. By the way, I do think there's going to be a crisis. I mean, I accept that there's going to be a major effort to create problems in Belarus over the next few months. My impression is that Putin and Lukashenko have it sewn up now. I think they've taken all the necessary steps to make sure that whatever crisis is hatched over the next few weeks and months, it'll be very quickly controlled. But that's we'll just wait and see.
All right, close to 1,600 likes. Awesome,
Wow.
guys. When will you do a call in again? I think Monday we will do a call in, but it'll probably be shortened because I have to take a meeting after the call in. But we will do a call in on Monday, right, Monday. Alexander? Is that
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely, that's fine. Yeah,
and I'll send the links and everything. All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you guys for joining us for this live stream. Have a great weekend, everybody. Any final thoughts, Alexander?
Well, it's an amazing program, but I mean, it's interesting because you said at the beginning that this was a rather general topic, and yet look how many comments it's produced. People feel about these things, and we've seen on this live stream how engaged people are with all the various different elements of the world being on fire.
Yeah, world on fire.
It's
not on fire yet. We talked about chaos. That's where they want to take it, but we'll do our best to stop them.
Absolutely.
All right. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care of yourselves, and keep an eye out for some really good videos that we have coming up over the weekend. Take care.